What is going on, everybody? I am back with another video, speaking my mind as I always do on this channel. And while I don't mean to make rage bait content, that is apparently how it comes across to some people that watch my videos. But truth be told, I have just held these opinions for a long time, and well, I got to vent somewhere. So this week, I was actually looking at the top 10 highest grossing tours of 2024. Obviously now we're halfway through 2025, but I think this really gives a wide landscape of what the music industry is looking like. And in this video, I'm actually going to be advocating for younger, newer artists. If you thought I was about to slam a bunch of bands, that is not my intention with this video. I actually want to advocate and promote for newer artists and newer creation out there. And I feel like we've hit a point in the music industry, specifically for guitar-driven music, where it has hit the decline massively in the last 10 years. I've noticed a change. I know a lot of other people have noticed a change. If you're younger than me, maybe you haven't noticed that as much, but I feel like, with hindsight, which is what I have in my favor here, I've noticed a huge change in the music industry in 2025. So I looked at all the bands and the artists that were on this list. It's no surprise that Taylor Swift was number one, and she's kind of in her own league, in my opinion. I don't even really count her as a part of this, but it will be of relevance to the video because Taylor Swift actually came out when I was in middle school. Yeah, can you believe that? When was that? Like 2011-ish, around there, okay? I remember like when I was 11, 12, 13 years old, and every girl in my class loved Taylor Swift. It's still like that, okay? So keep that in mind as I go into the rest of this video, because now I'm going to specifically mention a couple of these bands that are on the list. Now, number one that comes to mind is Metallica, okay? Now, I grew up on Metallica. Some could even say that maybe Metallica actually led me into wanting to do this as a career at a very young age. When I was 9 years old, my dad literally bought me Guitar Hero Metallica, okay? And my mom at the time wasn't a huge fan of my dad introducing me to that music, but I was completely mesmerized by it, and I loved the sound of it. I didn't even understand what the word heavy necessarily meant at the time, but all I knew was that this music sounded awesome, and I wanted to hear more of it. I wanted to play like it, and I wanted to be just like the guys in the band, play in front of huge crowds, etc. You could say, for all intent and purpose, I wanted to be a rock star at a very young age. Obviously, I pursued that, and now I'm an adult, and I'm still in the music business full time. I do not have another job. This is what I do for a living. So I would say that it has been a fairly successful life career. I'm not as big as Metallica, obviously. Do you guys know my riffs? Definitely, probably not. But nonetheless, it has been a eventful and successful life career thus far. I will be 26 next month, and I definitely am proud of all my achievements thus far. But with that being said, okay, this drove me into obviously heavier music, more music. I got, of the essence, I got into a lot of punk music, in my early age. I was always kind of anti-mainstream, growing up. And obviously, now I really like everything. But this is where my dilemma comes into play, is that Metallica was rated as number 9 for the highest grossing tour of 2024. Something to the effect of, over $100 million were made on the tour. So with that being said, I have noticed a trend in the younger generation. Most of my students' favorite band is Metallica, and they want to only learn music by Metallica, I would say 80% of the time. There's not really a lot of new inspiration, going on for these younger kids. Now, I was fortunate that I feel like I kind of grew up in a time that was at the very tail end of rock being still pretty popular. And especially the alternative scene, a lot of the indie rock bands, the emo bands. My Chemical Romance was still very popular coming off of that run into my middle school slash high school time period, as well as Green Day. Foo Fighters were still putting out, big albums that were relevant at the time. Title Fight was a cool band. I mean, I could really go on, a whole list of that. So I feel fortunate that I was able to experience kind of some new inspiration that led me, through my musical journey at the time. But I find with these younger kids, they're not having that happen. They're not finding the newer artists that are inspiring them to do newer things. Now, while music of old inspiring people is not a bad thing at all, being myself personally inspired by many, many old artists such as the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, and even in the classical realm of Bach and Chopin, I listen to a huge variety of music. But I think when it comes to getting kids into the electric guitar, getting the younger generation a wider musical palette, these bands need to retire. Metallica is old now, okay? And my beef with them is not their music and their first 5 albums being good. My beef with them is the fact that they're basically dominating the rock and metal music live industry, especially by only just doing these mega tours and not even taking new artists out with them to showcase, okay? There was a time where a bigger artist would take a newer artist out on tour with them to give them an open door to a new audience. For the record, though, in the edit, I do realize that Mammoth is a newer band. But if you look at it from the perspective that I am, it's still very political, being that is Eddie Van Halen's son. No shade to Mammoth. They're a good band, and his son totally rips on guitar, and he's awesome. But it's not really the same kind of new band when you put it into that perspective. Also, to all of you that are going to say Ice Nine Kills, they've also been around for over 10 years, so they are not a new band. Of younger people or just a new, fresh audience in general, especially if the band was on the come up and there was a new band kind of right under them, they could bring them out and say, hey, check out this band. We like them. They're on tour opening for our band right now. Make sure you go listen to their music and buy their stuff. No one's doing that now. So now we're just stuck with these older bands literally dominating the entire music industry. And I had to think about this for a long time because, I think actually Rick Beato mentioned this in a video that I watched as well, that the average age of artists right now that are huge is the age of 37 years old, which is kind of crazy. So what's happening? Do I have all the answers in this one video? Not really, but I think part of the answer is letting go of the times of old and accepting that this is old now, and that these other bands also should accept the fact that they need to be less selfish and take out newer bands on the road with them. That would at least help, if not retire completely, to allow the door to open for newer artists to take those spots, because right now there is a huge gap in the rock music industry, especially where newer bands are not getting successful enough to be able to fill arena and stadium headlining spots. Now, I received a couple comments from my one of my last videos, the video that said, "This made me quit metal," I think it was. And someone said, rock is super popular and it is fresh right now and it is bigger than it's ever been. I just saw Iron Maiden last year and I saw Foo Fighters last year. I saw Metallica. I took my daughter to those concerts and it was awesome. That's all fine and dandy, except for the fact that all those bands literally should retire. And I'm serious about that. Look at all the bands still doing farewell tours just to cash in. Now look, I'm a capitalist. I got no problem with making money, especially from music, being that I do it for a living. But at some point, you got to just call it spade to spade when bands are being selfish and completely taking the lion's share for themselves, capitalizing on things that happened 20 to 30 years ago already for their career, and still riding the momentum from that, not allowing for new artists to fill those slots, okay? Metallica is the #1 band, in my opinion, that should throw in the towel and retire. It's not that I don't love their music. Frankly, I've over-listened to it in my life, so I can't recall like another time that I will be listening to them. But let's look at a couple other bands. Like, for example, they took out Pantera on the road with them. And I use the quotes because, let's all be honest, that is not Pantera. Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul are Pantera, okay? Specifically Dimebag Darrell. I mean, dude, if you don't have his guitar, this is like Eddie Van Halen, okay? That's like taking Van Halen out and doing a Van Halen tour without Eddie Van Halen, who is the band, okay? I would also argue David Lee Roth, but that's a personal opinion. To me, without David Lee Roth and Eddie, you don't even have Van Halen. So that's how I look at it with Pantera as well. You know, Phil Anselmo, okay, cool. Rex Brown, okay, cool. But let's just be honest here. Dimebag Darrell is Pantera. He created the sound. Their music is completely guitar-driven music to the fullest extent. I mean, when I think of their music, I don't even think of the singing. I think of the riffs. So Metallica has taken Pantera on the road with them primarily this last year. And I find that really kind of odd and just kind of selfish, because now you got two bands cashing in on a legacy that happened 20 to 30 years ago. Now, a lot of people will say also, well, the newer artists are not making music that is palatable to listen to. I kind of agree with that as well. Let's look at a couple newer bands that have had some success. Polyphia would probably be the primary example I would use, as they are one of the newer and bigger bands of the modern age. Their music is nowhere near mainstream at all, although I will say their last album has come pretty close, okay? So when I was actually envisioning where rock music and metal music should go in terms of direction, I actually was thinking the sound that Polyphia ended up crafting on the last album they put out. Maybe not quite to that experimental of a level, but definitely with the song like ABC, they finally hit a point where I was like, this is exactly what your band should be doing right now. And this is exactly what a lot of bands should have been doing right now, with the kind of fusion of hip-hop and rock together, still with the cool guitar stuff, but also with some nice singing on it, and actually trying to make a hit song. A lot of bands now are getting caught up in not only the experimental factor of their music, but almost getting caught up, in my opinion, of the Instagram guitarist phenomenon, where everyone just wants to be so good you're almost a robot. So with that, you're taking out all of the creativity from the music, and you just want to show that you're the best. Now, everyone wants to be the best. You know, I think having a competitive spirit, there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of these artists have now, in my opinion, started compromising the musicality of what they're creating over the competition aspect of guitar playing in general. Because if you look at a band like Polyphia, every single one of their band members could be justified as a virtuosic musician, okay? Am I saying they're the best in, their field? I'm not saying that, but they are very good. And I think that is also kind of overtaken a little bit. If we look at a band, let's look at a band like Van Halen for a second. Virtuosic musicianship, at least from one or two members of the band, I would argue Eddie and Alex Van Halen, but still writing pop songs and occasionally incorporating that virtuosic aspect in a way that is palatable for all audiences, where you listen to it and it doesn't require, I guess you could say, like a nerdy audience to like it, but rather a mainstream audience that can accept and respect the fact that the music is good for what it is. And they just like it because the songs are good, and it just so happens to also be difficult to play, not the other way around. okay? So I think that the entire genre is kind of in a very limbo state right now, and it's not able to find a good middle ground at the moment. You also have the aspect of a lot of singing, and the rock genre has become not very palatable for mainstream audiences either. A lot of it is either in the alternative side of things, where it's almost like this cry, screaming, kind of yelling thing going on, or you just have death metal, aspects of metal music, and no one's finding like a happy medium. Like, where is the next Sammy Hagar? We don't have someone singing like that with some pipes. Or you got bands like Greta Van Fleet that are, again, capitalizing on things that were popular almost 40 years ago, just about. Actually, maybe longer than that. Yeah, a lot longer than 40 years ago. So I think the innovation aspect of the genre has been kind of faltered upon, with a lot of these artists kind of starting to gatekeep the sound of the music, saying, you're a poser. This isn't metal. This isn't rock. This is crap. And I think a lot of what dictates that is what you're also seeing in live music right now, with bands like Metallica not taking newer artists out with them to showcase, like, hey, this is okay to like this new thing. But instead, they're bringing out legacy bands with them. I mean, I would even consider, when I saw Metallica back in 2017, they took Gojira out on the road with them. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that's kind of fresh. Well, not really. They're still over 20 years old. I'm talking like, bring out an artist that has come out in the last 5 years. Super fresh, okay? Let them get on Jimmy Kimmel, okay? Let that happen. Let them make it to that point so they can take your slot when you guys actually do retire. Coldplay is another one. Been around forever. I'm not sure who their opening acts are, but these are the acts that are dominating. They also made the list for top 10 biggest tours of 2024. I think these artists really need to not gatekeep their peers as much, because a lot of it's going to be political for the bands, where it's like, hey, we're friends with this band, etc. We're going to take them out on the road over this other band who we don't know, etc. But I think in order for the genre to start thriving again, or at least allow for some new innovation to come into it, these older bands need to either completely retire or be open-minded enough to start taking newer acts out with them to promote to the younger audience, okay? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe rock's gonna die entirely. I don't really want to see any genre of music die, okay? So that's why I'm advocating for that in this video. But what are your thoughts on this subject, on the rock and metal music of the modern age? Let me know your thoughts below. I appreciate all of you for watching this video, and don't forget, like, subscribe, all of that. And if you are a guitar player yourself, subscribe to my free monthly newsletter, where I give a written guitar lesson every month, as well as getting access to all of my tabs. So with that being said, I will see all of you on the next video.